What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the Necromancer tank. So the Necromancer tank is a pretty interesting kind of tank spec because you can really build it into one of two different specs here. You can either go the more traditional MMO tanking route and go for a more beefy tank, or you can take a different approach and kind of capitalize on one of the Necromancer's ultimate generation moves and become basically a Warhorn battery. So those are two kind of different builds, and so for this particular build we'll be focusing in on the ultimate battery, that Warhorn generator. Now, like I said, you can go the alternative route, which is go the more traditional MMO and play a much more tanky Necromancer tank. The toolkit provided in the Necromancer tank is pretty kind of leans heavily towards really being chunky, being meaty, being able to be a very good damage sponge. But in ESO, tanking is more about support, and so we're going that ultimate battery route instead. So be on the lookout. I might release a more tanky, more traditional MMO Necro tank build later on down the line. So like the rest of our build videos, we'll be going over gear, skills, attributes, everything you need to know to basically recreate this build yourself. Now, as a support role, because tanks and healers in ESO are kind of fall more in support rather than, full-on tank, we will be discussing all the various skills and sets that you're going to want to have on hand to be able to swap out depending on the trial, depending on the fight, depending on your specific group. So we will be discussing in length a lot about different skills and sets you're going to want to have on hand. And because we are a support role, we will not be doing a DPS parse. Instead, I'll kind of be discussing the philosophy behind tanking and kind of what you kind of want to keep an eye on while you are tanking vet trials or vet dungeons. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started here first with our gear. So again, this is just one of many potential combinations of sets. We'll be discussing all of the sets in turn so you guys can get an idea of what you want to hold on to. Again, you're going to be swapping this out depending on the fight, depending on the group that you're running with. So for Monster Helm, we're going with Lord Wardens. This is a pretty safe assumption, that pretty safe Monster Helm set to run. Pretty nice to have on hand. So it increases your own resistances, and it also increases the group resistances within 8 meters of you. And this does stack with things like Major Ward, Major Resolve, so it just helps boost overall group survivability. It doesn't really provide any sort of additional DPS unless that additional survivability does allow DPS to survive through certain moves and certain attacks. Lord Warden is definitely a set you're going to want to have on hand. There are plenty of other Monster Helm sets, though, that you're going to want to have. So going over Monster Helm sets really quickly here. Starting off, we're going to go in alphabetical order here, so you're going to want to also have Bloodspawn on hand. For those of you guys who do not have access to any of the DLCs, Bloodspawn is pretty much one of, if not the only, good Monster Helm set for tanking. This comes from Spindle 2. And this is really pairs very nicely with the idea behind being an ultimate generation battery, but generally speaking, Bloodspawn is going to be a little bit weaker overall compared to the other Monster Helm sets that we're going to be talking about. So it just gives you a chance to generate some additional ultimate and increases your resistances for 6 seconds. It can occur every 6 seconds. Because you're a tank, you're taking a lot of damage, so this does proc a little bit more often than you would initially think, even though it does have a 6% chance to proc. But again, it ties in more with the ultimate battery, and so it allows you to get more Warhorns up. Earthgore was changed in Elsweyr. Instead of healing everybody within the circle, it now only heals the person with the lowest amount of health in the circle, but it does end up cleansing pretty much all of your AoEs, all enemy AoEs in the area. So it does you do have that trade-off here. Now Earthgore is still going to be fairly decent to run on a tank, but really going to be more useful in more selfish areas, mainly because they did change it so it only heals one person and it's the lowest health person in the area. So in instances where you're taking a lot of damage, so for example in Cloud Rest, the downstairs portal group, Earthgore is a pretty strong set to run there because you're pretty much guaranteed it's only going to proc on you. Now in other trials where people might be taking other damage, Earthgore is not going to be quite as strong, but in more selfish scenarios, again, Earthgore is a pretty nice set to hold on to. Moving on from there, other Monster Helm sets are going to be Symphony of Blades. This comes from Depths of Malatar. Really, really nice Monster Helm set here. So when you heal an ally who's under 50% of their primary resource, and that does not include you, you grant them Radius Favor. You give them either magic or stamina, whichever maximum is higher, every second for 6 seconds. So when you combine this with a lot of other support roles also running Symphony of Blades, you get a lot of additional sustain out for your DPS, and this basically allows them to spec a little bit less into sustain and more into raw damage. So Symphony of Blades is a very, very powerful support set that I highly recommend all support roles pick up. Now, in just by itself, it's not particularly useful, but when you combine it with 2 or even 3 Symphony of Blades, it becomes very, very nice sustain tool. Next, we have Thurvokun. This comes from Fang Lair. So when you take damage from a nearby enemy, you summon a growing pool of desecrated bile for 8 seconds. The bile basically deals a certain amount of disease damage every second, and it also inflicts minor maim and minor defile on anything it hits. This is very nice for an AoE minor maim. Necromancers do have an AoE minor maim move, but it's not very easy to use. It's not very consistent, so I like to use Thurvokun instead on a Necrotic in order to get that more consistent minor maim going. And then finally we have Vykosa. This is a pretty niche set, but where it is very useful, it is incredibly powerful. So when you bash an enemy you've taunted, you frighten them with a deafening howl, applying major maim to them for 3 seconds, lowering their damage done by 30%. This effect can occur once every 15 seconds, so really nice when you know the mechanics of the fight and you can anticipate burst damage happening. Very good example of this would be in Asylum, as the off think. If you can anticipate St. Lotus's Defiling Blast, you can apply minor maim on at the very least 1, maybe even 2 of those blasts if you time it right, and help out survivability for your DPS. You can also use it in other scenarios, so for example in the newest trial of Sunspire, you might be able to run Vykosa to decrease the amount of damage you take from their Dragon's Breath move if you're having trouble surviving it. So a couple of nice niche uses for Vykosa, but it's not going to be kind of a general set that you can fall back on. It's going to be for very, very specific fights, very, very specific scenarios. Moving on to armor sets. So here with this particular build we have Ebon. This is a base game set from Crypt of Hearts. Probably one of the best support sets in the game for tanks because it does provide additional health to everybody around you within 28 meters, which is really, really nice. So it allows your DPS to spec more into maximizing damage rather than having to spec a little bit into survivability that way. And then for our second set, we are running Perfected Yolnahkriin. This is the new heavy armor set from Sunspire. Fits in very, very nicely with the idea behind tanking being a very support-heavy role. So the 5-piece, when you taunt an enemy, you give yourself and 11 group members minor courage for 15 seconds. So this does stack with Reanimate, which gives out major courage, and because the proc condition is a taunt, obviously this only falls on a tank. So really, really nice. It's a heavy armor set, so you can wear this on the body as well, and the armor bonuses are really nice. Max health, max stamina. The perfect version has additional max health on the 5-piece, and you get that minor Aegis. So even though you have a lot of mitigation already as a tank, minor Aegis is still just a little bit of a nice icing on the cake with Perfected Yolnahkriin. Now you can also go with the imperfect version. The imperfect version just loses out on the additional max health, which isn't that big of a deal as a tank. Again, for those of you guys who kind of know the philosophy behind taking an ESO, the idea is to become just tanky enough to survive all the big hits that you need to survive, and then spec into more support that way. So losing the max health is not that big of a deal if you are not able to get the perfected version of this set here. Now you do have a lot of other sets that you're going to want to have on hand, so we're going to go through each of them in turn, and we're going to go through them in alphabetical order here. So starting off first with, I can find it here, the dungeon sets. There aren't that many dungeon sets that you're going to want to hold on to, but there are a few that you might want to consider picking up. So Leeching Plate is nice, so for additional self-heals, this is a very selfish set, so really strong. You can get this from Imperial City Prison, so if you need to get Lord Warden, then you might as well also try to get a couple of pieces of Leeching Plate as well. Again, not very support-oriented, this is more for selfish setups only. And then you have Jailer's Tenacity, again, more selfish. This comes from Moonhunter Keep, so if you're farming for Vykosa, you might as well also try to get some Jailer's Tenacity as well. So whenever you lose 7,000 or more health from a single attack, you gain major vitality for 5 seconds, increasing your healing received by 30%. Not many fights in the game will have meet that condition where you lose 7,000 or more health in a single attack. But there are a few where this set might come in handy. So Cloud Rest, for example, if you're tanking Zamaja and you get hit by either Baneful Mark or Heavy Attack, that clearly will definitely fit the proc condition, and you'll get that major vitality bonus there. Really nice sets to have, but again, it's more selfish, less support oriented there. Moving on to trial sets, there's not that many here that you're going to want to pick up. Aegis of Gallenway might be nice if they change it, but generally speaking, most of the sets here are not going to be all that useful. Perhaps maybe Eternal Warrior. This is a very selfish set if you kind of want to play it safe or sign up no death achievements. Depends on whether your group is comfortable using these sort of death prevention sets or not. But this is probably the only set I would consider actually trying to get. This comes from any of the 3 Traveler and Trials, and again, this is a death preventer, which is nice for those no death achievements. But again, it depends on whether your group that you run with is comfortable using this set to get those no death achievements. And then finally, we do have overland sets. I do have to pull them out here. So heavy overland sets. There are a few that you're going to want to hold on to. Very similar to the other sets, though. A lot of these are more selfish. So, for example, Plague Doctor is just raw selfishness, just raw max health, which pairs up very nicely with some Necro abilities. But again, this is very selfish, not really going toward the more support-oriented kind of approach that you should be taking as an ESO tank. Now, Akaviri Dragonguard kind of fits into both support and a little bit of selfishness as well. So this comes from East March. It reduces the cost of your ultimate by 15%. So this basically allows you to get faster Warhorns, and when you combine this with the really fast ultimate generation potential of Necromancers, you can really pump out Warhorns very, very quickly with Akaviri Dragonguard. So it increases your major force uptime, which increases your overall DPS. So a little bit selfish, a little bit support, really nice balance there with Akaviri Dragonguard. And then from there is one last set that you might want to consider getting, and this is Livewire. This is from Clockwork City. This basically just is a fairly consistent way to apply concussion to enemies. The only other way to apply concussion to enemies or concuss would be through shock damage, whether that's enchants or just regular shock damage from abilities. So if you're in a position where you need the additional concussed, then Livewire is a pretty okay set to pick up. Not something that I would necessarily farm for or purchase, but something to keep on the back of your mind in case for some reason your group needs that additional concussed and you can't, for example, run a Magicka DPS, or your healers aren't able to run the shock glyph or whatever reason. Now, there are a few other sets that are not heavy sets that you're also going to want to pick up too. So the first set here, let me see, find it, is a medium trial set. And it is your Alkosh. War of Alkosh is the strongest support set in the game for tanks right now. So even though it is a medium armor set, the 5-piece fits more nicely with a tank. So whenever you activate a synergy, you send out a shockwave from your position that deals a certain amount of physical damage, and also reduces the physical and spell resistance of any enemy hit by 3010 for 10 seconds. Now, I already did a video kind of explaining why Alkosh is best suited on a tank, so you guys can check that out instead of me kind of going into why Alkosh is really good on a tank. One thing to consider is that it is a medium armor set, so you do need to have jewelry and weapons with Alkosh. You can't really run the body pieces. If you're a very, very high-end score running tank, then you might be able to medium armor on both sets, but that's really, really high-end, not really something you see very often in progression trial guilds. So War of Alkosh is really, really strong, and you definitely want to make sure to have that on hand. Another set that you're going to want to pick up is going to be a medium armor set. Find it. It's going to be Hircine's Veneer. So this is the stamina version of a worm. So it reduces the cost of your stamina abilities by 4% for you and up to 11 other group members within 28 meters of you. Really nice if you have a lot of stamina DPS and your healers are not able to run Hircine's. Very similar to Alkosh, because it's medium armor, you're going to want to run it on jewelry and weapons. Then you also have the Magicka version, which is going to be a worm. So find it real fast. Where are you? Worm's Raiment. So this is a Magicka version of Hircine's Come from Vaults of Madness. Again, very similarly to Hircine's, it's a light armor set, so you do need to have jewelry and weapons for Worm. For Worm and Hircine's, they're only going to be very few scenarios where you're going to want to wear this, and it's going to be more for when you're trying to push for scores and certain harder achievements. You might be asked to run these two sets here. Typically speaking, your healers will be running these sets, but you might want to have these on hand in case you want to run them on a tank instead. And finally, I need to find one final set here that you're going to want to pick up. It's going to be in the Telvar set, and it is going to be Powerful Assault. So this is a medium armor set from Imperial City. You can buy it with Telvar stones, or you can buy it off guild traders. When you cast an assault ability, you increase weapon and spell damage for up you and up to 3 other allies within 10 meters of you by 164 for 15 seconds, and this does stack with minor and major courage, so it is a unique buff. Now, Nefes has done a good video on how powerful Assault works, and this is a pretty nice set overall. You will need to use Vigor in order to proc this set. It's the most common way to proc it on a DK tank, or a tank in general, but it is a very nice set to run. It does require a lot of micromanaging in order to make sure that you're basically applying the buff to all your DPS rather than having your tank or your healers steal it, but when you do micromanage it successfully, it's a nice DPS buff because it does stack with major and minor courage. And those are pretty much all the sets that you're going to want to have on hand, and I will have them all listed down in the description below for you guys. Moving on to our character sheet. Race doesn't really matter as much for tanking as it does for DPS. So I am a Dark Elf, and that's just because I like playing as a Dark Elf. But if you truly want to min-max your race for a tank, you basically have 3 options. You can run either Nord, you can run Imperial, or you can run Argonian, and all of them have their strengths and weaknesses. So Nords get additional resistances, so you can spec a little bit less into resistances that way, and you can spec a little bit more into other areas, so really nice there. They also get some additional ultimate generation whenever they take damage, so kind of ties very nicely into the Necromancer ultimate generation build that we have going on here. Those are the strength of Nords. They also get additional max health and max stamina. Imperials also pretty nice for tanking, so they get just raw stats. So they get max health, max stamina, and they get a little bit of sustain as well. So they get 333 health, magicka, and stamina. So all 3 whenever they deal direct damage I believe it's every 5 seconds. So a nice amount of sustain there with Imperials, and you get a lot more raw stats compared to Nords. So Nords get, I believe, 2,000 max health and 1,000 max stamina, but Imperials get 2,000 of each. So really nice in terms of just pure raw stats. And then you have Argonians, which get, I think, 1,000 health, 1,000 magicka. So no additional stamina, so you do want to kind of spec a little bit heavier into stamina as an Argonian. But they do get a nice potion passive, which helps out their sustain. So they get 4,000 magicka, health, and stamina back no matter what potion they drink. So really, really nice additional sustain tool there for Argonians. Now, if you want to kind of prepare a little bit more for very end games, sort of score running and achievement running, then you might want to consider running an Orc instead, because sometimes as a tank you'll be asked to DPS, do some little bit of off DPS, and Orcs are the best stamina DPS race right now. And tanks are more geared better for stamina DPS compared to magic DPS, just due to the way that your attributes are set up. So Orcs are going to be a nice option if you kind of want to min-max at the very, very high end of tanking. But like I mentioned before, race doesn't really play that big of a deal in tanking. It's more about how well you're able to learn mechanics and how well you're able to deal with mechanics. For attributes, it's going to vary depending on your race. So for example, Nords and Imperials get additional max health, but as a Dark Elf like I am here, I don't get any additional max health through my racial passives, but do have to stack a little bit more heavily into health that way. Now, Necromancers do get a Last Gasp passive, which gives them additional 1,250 health, so you do get a little bit of additional headroom there, so you can put a little bit fewer points into health compared to, like, for example, on a Dragon Knight or a Templar tank, and put some more points into stamina and magicka like I have here. So I have 25 into health, 24 into stamina, 15 into magicka, but again, it's going to vary depending on your specific race and specific sets that you're running. General rule of thumb for attributes: you want to hit at least 35k health. That's my personal recommendation, 35k health, no matter what sort of gear combination you're running. I believe the lowest health you can possibly get is running something like Dragonguard and Alkosh, which have no additional health. Something like Dragonguard and Torug's Pact, you have 1 health bonus there, so you can kind of play around a little bit and figure out how much health you need to put in to hit that 35k threshold. Beyond that, just make sure your stamina is higher than your magicka. In most instances, you're going to want stamina to be higher than magicka, because shards and orbs will return the highest out of those 2 stats. You use stamina to block, so you just want to make sure you have higher stamina compared to magicka. Not change my Mundus. So for Mundus Stone, you're going to want to run the Atronach. So that just gives you additional magicka regen, because a lot of our buffs, a lot of our moves typically use magicka instead. So all of our healing abilities, a lot of our sort of utility moves, they all use max magicka. So you want to make sure to get as much magicka recovery as you can by running the Atronach. In terms of food, running all tri-stat food. So this is purple base game food, which gives us max health, max stamina, max magicka. And we are a vampire for the additional regen, as well as the undeath passive, which is additional mitigation when we fall below 50% health. Now we will take more fire damage, and we do have lower health regen, but those are fair trade-offs to make. I should say good trade-offs to make for the undeath passive and the additional 10% magicka and stamina regen. moving on over to skills. So we have a lot of different flex spots we can use here. Running a Necromancer tank, one of the things that really stands out is just how many skills you can actually put on and that you want to put on. So we will be talking about all these different skills. So on our front bar, we are running Sword and Board, so Pierce Armor, Heroic Slash, Hungry Scythe, Balance, Necrotic Potency, and Animate Blast Bones. For our back bar, we are running a Lightning Staff, so we have Inner Rage, Beckoning Armor, Blockade of Storms, Intensive Mender, Mortal Coil, and Aggressive Warhorn. So you will notice that I am running a staff on the back bar, and that is because we are running a shock enchant, so that basically allows us to get really good concussed uptime. Now you can also replace this with a crusher enchant instead, depending on whether your healers are running Torug's Infused Crusher or not, or whether you are running Crusher. So it really depends on your specific group. If your healers have Crusher covered, then you should be running something like a shock damage enchant on the back bar to help proc concussed. Whether that's a lightning staff or an ice staff on the back bar, it's up to you. You can even go put it on a bow as well. So really nice to help overall concussed uptime. Then on our front bar, we have charged in order to help the application of that concussed. We have 20% base chance with the shock damage enchant, and so with the charged additional effect here, we do get additional chance here of 100%, so that bumps it up to about 44% instead. Now, you will notice that we're also running breaching poisons on our front bar here, so you can run either minor breach poisons or minor fracture poisons, or you can run something like an absorb stamina, a drain stamina poison, or a drained health poison. Poisons are going to be a little bit stronger than enchants here, so you should just be running poisons instead on your front bar here. I just remembered here that we didn't really talk about armor traits or enchants or things like that, so we'll go over this and then we'll go back to our skill bars here, so while we're here. So for jewelry, I like to go 2 Triune and 1 Harmony. I just like the additional resource return that you get with Harmony, as well as the heal whenever you get the Blood Altar synergy. So I like to have at least 1 Harmony, but you don't need to use Harmony at all. Your jewelry traits can be pretty flexible, so you can go with Triune like I have here to give you the most out of your max resources. You can go with max robust and maximize your max stamina. You can go with healthy to maximize your max magicka. You can go with infused to get stronger enchant strength. And you can go with harmony for better synergies. Generally speaking, I like Triune the best, followed next by harmony and then robust. For enchants, I have shield plate enchants on all 3 of my jewelry, so this should basically reduce the cost of block. You can also go with magicka regen glyphs if you'd like, or if you're an Argonian, or just in general, you don't have to be an Argonian necessarily. You can go with the potion cooldown glyphs, which reduces the cooldown of your potions 5 seconds each with non-infused, 8 seconds with infused, so that basically allows you to get better sustain by allowing you to drink your tri-stat potions a little bit more often. It will end up draining potions more quickly, so it is going to be more expensive to obviously use all these potions, but if you want some additional sustain, then potion regen, potion cooldown glyphs actually aren't a bad option. Now for armor traits and enchants, you kind of have 2 different blocks here. So you have all sturdy and you have sturdy, small, large, infused. So I typically go with large infused with small sturdy. But you can also go with all sturdy instead. There's really no wrong answer. It really depends on how you feel with the overall sustain with sturdy. So if you're doing fine with small pieces of sturdy, you don't necessarily need to change your large pieces of sturdy. You can go with infused instead to maximize your prismatic enchants. I like to go with prismatic enchants on all my large pieces, and then health enchants on all my small pieces. But you can mix and match your enchants accordingly, particularly on your small pieces, to kind of figure out what is the best sort of traits, or I should say resources, to maximize here. You can also go with all prismatics if you'd like, but that is going to be pretty expensive to trade out overall, but it will help maximize your overall stamina and magicka at the expense of a little bit of health there. Going back to our skill bars here, so again, this is an ultimate battery build here, so we're basically using Necrotic Potency here to our fullest potential. So this basically gives you 6 ultimate for every corpse that you use up. So we are running Beckoning Armor and Intensive Mender as our 2 corpse generating abilities. So Necromancers, these 2 abilities will generate corpses, whether either once they expire or if you recast them after half the duration has run out. So for example, with Intensive Mender, if you resummon it after 3 seconds, so there's 5 seconds remaining, it will not generate a corpse. If you resummon it after 5 seconds, so there's 3 seconds remaining, it will generate a corpse. So the idea behind this particular idea is use Intensive Mender for 4 seconds, resummon it so you have a corpse there, use Beckoning Armor, use it after 10 seconds, so it creates a corpse there, and then you can suck up those corpses with Necrotic Potency and get 6 ultimate back. So that's basically the idea behind this build here. It's really focusing on using Necrotic Potency, and obviously in Trash Balls you can use this with pure impunity and just get a crap ton of ultimate back for Warhorns during Trash Balls that way. Now, you will have a lot of different skills that you're going to want to have on hand to kind of trade off here and there depending on the specific trial, the specific fight, your specific group. So don't necessarily discount Colossus. So Warhorn is going to be better group support, but the Colossus ultimate will give you better burst. So there might be instances where the Colossus is going to be better suited for a specific fight compared to Warhorns. So you might want to make sure you have this here, either Pestilent or Glacial Colossus, doesn't really matter which one you pick, because you're a tank, you're not really centered on doing damage or anything like that. Then this is just for the major vulnerability. Under the Gravelord skill line, you want to pick up either Unnerving Boneyard or Avid Boneyard. So Avid Boneyard allows you to activate the synergy, so if you're running Alkosh, that'll give you a way to proc Alkosh on yourself reliably, but if you don't need the additional synergy on yourself, you can run Unnerving Boneyard instead for the AoE Major Breach and Major Fracture. Under Bone Tyrant, you can run Agony Totem here. This is basically going to be your root. So we're going with Agony because it basically allows you to run in, drop it down, and after 2 seconds basically fears everybody and holds them in place for 4 seconds. In more stack and burn fights, you can also activate a pure Agony synergy, which basically is an AoE minor vulnerability. So really nice in trash pulls. The vulnerability only lasts for 5 seconds, but it's typically going to be a nice boost in DPS during that 5 seconds. Again, for trash pulls, really nice to have here. You can also use it on yourself for additional minor protection as well. As a tank, you have a lot of different sources of mitigation, so minor protection here is not going to be particularly powerful, but it's still additional mitigation, so really nice to have on hand. You might as well put it down. It uses Magicka rather than the Circle of Protection stamina for minor protection. Now, Grave Grasp is another sort of AoE minor maim, as well as a root, so it's a hard CC. This is going to be a little bit difficult because it does go in front of you. So while you're running up the trash, for example, that's when you would cast this ability. Both targets are both morphs are kind of useful. Ghostly Embrace is going to be definitely going to be easier to run just because Empowering Grasp does require you to basically face your allies here, which might not necessarily be the best scenario, and it really depends on the trash pull, so not particularly consistent, so I'd rather go with Ghostly Embrace instead for the immobilization instead. And then under the Living Death line, we have Animate Blastbones as our front bar just for progression purposes. So this basically resurrects up to 3 allies within the target area. It does cost a lot of ultimate, and you're better off running Warhorn, but in progression guilds, the Resurrectant ultimate is really nice. So I like Animate Blastbones. You can go with Renewing Animation instead. Really, it's up to you which one you want to pick. For here, Expunge and Modify is an ability that you're going to want to have. This is basically a self-purge, so it removes up to 2 negative effects from yourself, the same amount that Purge does, but it also restores magic and stamina for each effect you remove, and it does cost a little bit of health to run, but it is a nice purge. It's very cheap, so definitely something you want to have on hand for those fights where you want to run Purge. And finally, Mortal Coil, which we already have here on the bars here. This is just some additional stamina generation that you can have while you're blocking. You don't generate stamina while blocking unless you have Mortal Coil down. It also is a self-heal, and if you're able to proc this and have some allies between you, it also heals other allies, giving you a way to proc Symphony of Blades. Otherwise, the main source of proccing Symphony of Blades is going to be coming from Intensive Mender instead. Under other skill lines here, Absorb Magic is a nice fallback. If you have any sort of spell projectiles, it's a nice heal. It also gives you some additional block mitigation, so nice little reduction in damage here if you don't have anything else to run here. Under the Destruction Staff line, you might want to make sure to pick up Elemental Drain mostly for 4-man content, less so for trials if you're running like 1 tank, 3 DPS. For the minor Magicka Steel as well as the major breach. Mostly for the Magicka Steel, less so for the breach there. Under your Fighter's Guild line, Circle of Protection is a nice AoE minor protection. It does use stamina and uses a lot of stamina. And you also already have Agony Totem, which is going to be more useful. It has a larger radius as well. So Circle of Protection on a Necromancer is not something I would recommend running because you do have access to Agony Totem, which basically provides the same thing, just for a shorter period of time. Under the Mages Guild, nothing much here. You just want to make sure you have some form of Major Ward Mage Resolve, so Beckoning Armor provides it, but we are also running Balance here for the additional Magic Sustain. But if you feel like you don't need the Magic Sustain, if you're perfectly fine, then you can drop Balance if you would like. Deep Thoughts is nice for the health as well as the magic and stamina. You don't get any ward or resolve, but because we are running Beckoning Armor, you can also just run Deep Thoughts rather than Balance here. Now, one thing I will point out about Beckoning Armor here, while we're on the subject of additional skills, is the fact that the pull, while it is nice, it's a passive pull, it is not very consistent and it's not very fast. It only activates every 3 seconds and it can only pull one enemy at a time. So in those instances where you want to more faster pull power, particularly things like Dragonstar Arena, Black Rose Prison, you're going to want to have Silver Leash instead. So Beckoning Armor is nice when you have just a few ads that you can pull in every once in a while, every 3 seconds or so. But if you're in a trial or in a dungeon where you need to pull a lot of things very quickly, then you're going to want to run Silver Leash instead. In that instance, you might, instead of running something like Blockade, run Silver Leash instead of that. Under the Undaunted line, pretty much all the abilities here are stuff you're going to want to have on hand. So Overflowing Altar for the healing synergy as well as the lifesteal, Shadow Silk for the Black Widow synergy, which is still pretty strong, Range Taunt, the Bone Surge for the Spinal Surge synergy for the shield as well as the Major Vitality, really nice in those scenarios where you're going to want to have it, so like Cloud Rest for example. An Energy Orb, a nice heal, helps to proc Symphony of Blades, as well as give out the additional Combustion synergy for your DPS. Under the Alliance War, Resolving Vigor if you're running Powerful Assault, or you can also run Caltrops for additional DPS to proc Powerful Assault as well. Echoing Vigor or Resolving Vigor, both are perfectly fine options to run. It also helps proc Symphony of Blades. And for support, if you need to purge somebody besides yourself, you're going to want to run Efficient Purge instead. You can also run a Replenishing Barrier as an ultimate, so you get the additional Magicka regen from Magicka Aid. Now for our CPs, CP cap is 810, so you do have 270 points to put across each of our different constellation types here. So I do have to change a couple of CP points around. So we have 64 in Arcanist and 49 in Tenacity. Next we have either 66, or you can push it up even further to 72 if you'd like, or you can drop it down to 61 depending on your sustain. 66 is that nice happy medium, but if you want to push it up to 72, then certainly do so there. And then you can put the rest really wherever you'd like. So for example, you can do 40 into Tumbling, and you can push Warlord up to something like 44 or 45 to get rid of that last point there. It depends on the specific trial. So for instance, if you're in a trial where you want to do some more dodge rolling, you can take points out of Warlord, put them into dodge roll instead. For our blue CPs, again, I do need to readjust these because I was recording a video. The main points here, if you're going pure tank, is 100 Blessed, 100 Healthborn, and then put the rest into Precise Strikes here. 70 Precise Strikes, 100 Healthborn, 100 Blessed. Now, the thing with blue CPs is it's geared more towards DPS, and if you need to off DPS as a tank, then you can take some points out of Blessed, take some points out of Healthborn, and put them accordingly into respective CP points. Nodes, I should say. So you can drop Blessed to 75, Healthborn down to 81. Those are the next jump points down, and you get back some points that way. Finally, our red CPs. This is going to be a one-size-fits-most approach, a very general approach to CPs. So for any specific trial, you might need to shift some points around depending on how much damage you're taking from different sources. 81 Ironclad, 61 Thickskin, and 64 into Hardy and Elemental Defender. So that is pretty much it for all the build information. So really quickly talking about sort of gear philosophy behind tanking. So for Necrotank, this particular build, like I mentioned, you're kind of focusing in on generating as much ultimate as you can using Necrotic Potency. I already mentioned this when we talked about it a little bit earlier, but the idea is to use your Intensive Mender every 4 seconds or more. That way you generate that corpse, and use Beckoning Armor every 10 seconds or more in order to generate that corpse that way. Once you have that corpse, use Necrotic Potency to get some additional ultimate that way. Other than that, the general idea behind tanking is you have basically 3 jobs. First job, stay alive, pretty self-explanatory. Second job, keep taunt on the boss, again, pretty self-explanatory. The third job is buffing and debuffing. So once you master the first two jobs, your goal is to maximize your third job, buffing and debuffing. So that comes from things like sets you're wearing, so Yolnahkriin, Alkosh, Powerful Assault, as well as skills that you're using as well. So for example, Blockade of Storms to help off-balance uptime to give your stamina DPS a little bit more push there. Then you have different skills and sets in order to maximize your support. So for example, running Vigor, not only the Powerful Assault, but also to help proc Symphony and Blades on your DPS as well. So kind of idea behind tanking is first learn the mechanics of the fight. That way you're able to know your fight, you know what to dodge, you know what you can survive, things like that. And then from there, move on to buffing and debuffing. So in a progression style guild, there's no shame in having to run a selfish set along with a support set. So for example, running Plague Doctor and Yolnahkriin or Plague Doctor and Alkosh, it's perfectly fine to do in a progression style guild. But once you get a little bit more comfortable, then you want to try to transition over more towards running two support-oriented sets like Ebon and Alkosh, or Ebon and Powerful Assault, or Yolnahkriin and Powerful Assault, in order to help maximize your overall support. That's the general approach you want to take for tanking. Now, in terms of actual tankiness, if you need a self-heal, just use Hungry Scythe. It's a pretty nice self-heal. It's one of the stronger self-heals in the game. Really solid option there. You have plenty of other self-heals too, like Mortal Coil is a nice option. So you have a lot of different really good survivability as a Necro tank, which is why the other option, the more tanky, beefy, traditional MMO tank, is also a good option to run as a Necro tank, but that's going to be a build for a separate day if you guys are interested in that. So that's pretty much it for this build video. Hopefully I'll be able to get a Necro tank set up so I can stream some trials as a Necro tank so you guys can see how a Necro tank performs and compare that to a DK tank. Again, let me know down in the comment section below whether you want me to do a build kind of taking a look at a more traditional tanky Necro tank. You know, the more beefy, I'm here to absorb damage Necro tank. Let me know down in the comments if you would like to see a build like that. If you guys have any questions or comments about this particular build or tanking in general, leave them down in the comment section below and I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.